Hello and good morning, everyone. Happy fiscal new year, too, to some. Hi, welcome to Hudson Institute and to our program today. I'm Brigham McCown, Senior Fellow here and Director of the Initiative on American Energy Security. To kick us off, energy policy isn't just an economic imperative, it's also a cornerstone of national security. The United States and Canada, representing the world's largest bilateral energy partnership, sit atop vast resources of oil, natural gas, uranium, critical minerals, yet abundance alone does not deliver security. Clear, consistent, and forward-looking policies are essential to attract investment, to build infrastructure, and to ensure reliable energy affordably flows to our citizens and allies. As the G7 energy ministers prepare to meet later this month, the world is grappling with the challenges of balancing sometimes competing and inconsistent goals. North America can lead by offering clarity through predictable regulations, streamlined permitting, and harmonized standards which anchor global energy stability and undercut the leverage of authoritarian regimes. Today's panels, I think, reflect this vision. First, we'll determine how the U.S. and Canada can ensure the energy security of ourselves and allies in the face of ongoing Russian aggression and Chinese competition. Then we'll shift the focus to the continent's comparative advantages, its abundance of resources, and new technological development. These discussions matter, and when the U.S. and Canada act in unity and purpose, we don't just bolster our economies, we fortify the free world. First, I'd like to welcome our co-host, Jamie Tronis from CNAPS, to the podium, please. Jamie?
Thank you, Brigham. I just wanted to take a minute. For those of you who don't know, CNAPS is a project of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, a Canadian think tank, which most of you are probably familiar with. But the Macdonald-Laurier Institute is saddened to inform everyone that we have lost one of our board members yesterday, a giant in Canadian policy, Nigel Wright. Nigel was a friend to myself and many in this room. He passed away very suddenly at the young age of 62, and we mourn his loss. We would like to take a minute to honor his memory with a few minutes of silence. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now I'm very happy to welcome you and to welcome our guests.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jamie. My next role as the MC is to introduce Heather Exner-Pirot, Director of Energy, Natural Resources, and the Environment. Did I get all that, Heather? At the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Canada, to introduce your panel. Heather?
Well, thanks so much, Brigham, for the introduction, and again for hosting us. It's a great partnership that we have with the Hudson Institute, and delighted to be back here in DC, the first time since our North American Energy Forum that we held last year in November. I'm not the only one with a long title, so I'll get the formalities out of the way and introduce all of my wonderful co-panelists. On my immediate left is Gabrielle Hoffman, Director of IWF Center for Energy and Conservation. Thomas Duesterberg, the Senior Fellow at Hudson Institute. Diana Furchtgott-Roth, the Director of Center for Energy, Climate, and Environment at the Heritage Foundation. I thought we had pretty similar titles there, Diana. And last but not least, David Pierce, coming from the Great White North as well, the Vice President of Government Relations at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. So as Brigham mentioned, Canada is hosting the G7 Energy Ministers meeting at the end of the month in Toronto, October 29th and 30th. If you haven't been following the news in Canada, certainly energy and critical minerals have been refocused, as our energy minister said in August in Berlin, in Canadian domestic and foreign policy. And this G7 Energy Ministers meeting is a real opportunity for us to take some leadership, shape the agenda, and see how we can help our G7 allies with the natural resource endowment that we do have. I was just listening to a podcast last week with someone from Japan, and they made the point that they've been the lone voice in the G7 for the last few years, saying that we need to talk about LNG and LNG availability. And it struck me how much has changed in the last year. That even a year ago, LNG was a little bit on the controversial side, which obviously it isn't anymore. And so the first question I want to pose to everyone is, a lot has happened in politics last year, last month, last week, today. How do you think this G7 energy meeting is going to be different from the last few years? And maybe I'll start with you, David, and come down the line.
Sure, happy to. Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. It's great to come down. We actually went back and we looked to see the previous meetings, and we believe the Italians will be the only ones still in the room from last year. And you know, it just speaks to the change, I think, that's happened globally, the change that's happened in Canada. And it presents an opportunity for Canada to really solidify a change that our Prime Minister has committed to in the previous election just this spring, where his focus has shifted from what has been 10 years of Liberal government focused on keeping, frankly, resources in the ground. And there's been a realization in Canada that we can't pursue any of those other initiatives that potentially, we'll call them the left or the environmental focus really has driven, if we don't have a stable economy. And in Canada's context, we simply can't have one without a strong resource sector. And so we see this meeting coming up in October, certainly from the B7 that we held back in the spring. The shift has focused, it shifted from the net zero discussion of last year to energy security and economic security for Canada. And that's becoming really paramount. You know, I like to joke, I'm Dave, I'm from Canada, I'm here to help. And you know, from the folks that I've spoken to, business leaders right across the country, obviously the number one relationship is with the United States, there's no question. And we have, you know, as kids say these days, we've got what you need. In the sense we've got critical minerals, we've got resources that are in such abundance. The only challenge for Canada has actually been ourselves getting in our own way. And I think and I hope there's progress up in Canada to change that, where we can start to really capitalize on some of the wealth that we've been blessed to have in our country. And at the same time supporting our allies here in the United States with your needs, as well as in Europe. Our LNG capacity in Canada is tremendous, and obviously that's in dire need across Europe. So.
Yeah, and frankly, it's helpful when our allies push us to develop these resources.
Absolutely.
You know, some of our Polish colleagues are here who've been doing God's work on that front. Diana, over to you.
Sure. Well, when I heard that this was on the G7 meetings, what I did was I pulled up what the G7 is saying about climate. They want to focus on energy security, affordability, the clean energy transition. They want to accelerate decarbonization and explore new technologies. Well, some of these are contradictory, and we're all in favor of energy security and affordability. But we need to realize that the transition to net zero is not happening. And the G7 in its meetings should acknowledge that. They should look at the data that shows that those countries that pursue decarbonization and net zero have deindustrialization, higher unemployment, lower economic growth. And then look at these other countries that are pursuing a fossil fuel and nuclear power agenda, and they have stronger growth. And Europe is deindustrializing, and it's not helpful for the G7 to have its head in the sand and forget about the data. So if we look at electricity rates per kilowatt hour, in Germany and the United Kingdom, it's around 39 cents a kilowatt hour. They require renewables. In the United States, which has a mixture, because some states require renewables and others don't, it's about 18 cents per kilowatt hour. In China, Russia, Iran, it's less than 1 cent per kilowatt hour. So with the focus on renewables, we are basically buying solar panels and wind turbines and electric batteries from China, which makes about 70 to 80% of all these three components. They make them with coal-fired power plants. They're building 2 coal-fired power plants a week. So this effort of ours is not helping the environment. Heritage models brought in through the IPCC. These are IPCC models, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Models we run at the Heritage Foundation show that if the United States stopped using all fossil fuels today, it would make a difference of about 0.2 of 1 degree centigrade by the year 2100. If Europe stopped using all fossil fuels today, it makes a difference of 0.1 of 1 degree centigrade by the year 2100. So what we're doing by focusing on deindustrialization, decarbonization, is helping China, and it's not helping the climate because our emissions are a drop in the bucket compared with the rising emissions elsewhere. So I think the G7 should wake up, wise up, and see what is going on. And just one more point. We're fortunate in the United States to have 50 different states with 50 different electricity generating systems. And we can see that in the top 10 in electricity prices, in the lower 48 led by California at 32 cents per kilowatt hour, 9 out of the 10 require renewables. The one that doesn't is Alaska, which has other electricity generating problems of its own because there are few people on a very wide area. In the bottom 10 states, with the lowest being Utah and Louisiana at 11 cents per kilowatt hour, 9 out of the 10 do not require renewables, the one exception being Washington State, which benefits from hydroelectric power. So we can see what gives us affordable, resilient, reliable energy. We can see what doesn't, and the G7 should address the data.
Thank you so much, Diana. Thomas?
Okay, I'm going to take up Brigham's challenge to introduce some thoughts on the nexus between energy security and national security. The major national security problems that we're facing right now largely stem from Russia's aggression on the Ukraine, China's gray shadow aggression on the Pacific Rim. And I would note that we can have some impact on both of these issues by focusing on the North America as the arsenal of energy democracy, as I think we had a meeting here
I like to use that phrase all the time, actually.
6 months ago where we surfaced that several times. Anyway, right at the moment, China and India are the largest buyers of Russian oil, which helps to perpetuate the war against the Ukraine. They're also the largest suppliers to China, which is waging an economic war on the West. I would submit that given the current situation in global, especially oil and gas supplies, and relatively low prices, we should focus, the G7 should focus on convincing our allies that that we can supply them. We don't have to allow Russia and Iran and Venezuela to sell sanctioned oil to China and allow them to build up their chemicals industry with cheap oil and export more and more chemicals and refined petroleum products to Europe, to Turkey, to the United States. One of the things we need to focus on is cutting off, to the extent we can, and I think we have more power than we admit, the shadow fleets which are bypassing the sanctions. They're used by not only China, but Russia extensively. There was a study done by S&P Global detailing how the shadow fleets work. And one of the techniques, of course, is ship-to-ship transfers in the open oceans. Now, S&P also uncovered that the major areas where these ship-to-ship transfers are made are just off the coast of Spain, a place called Ceuta, the Peloponnesian Peninsula in Greece, Malta, and North Africa, all in the Mediterranean. Now, our friends in the G7, especially the Europeans, are looking the other way to these ship-to-ship transfers. And I would think that it would be a good thing for the G7 to focus on, led by the United States and Canada, to actually try to enforce the sanctions that are in place. I have 4 things I would urge the G7 to focus on, the energy ministers: increase sanctions on Russian and Iranian oil, including on China and India, perhaps including sanctions on the banks that are facilitating these illegal transfers. They're also facilitating arms transfers to Russia. Offer to supply more energy, oil and gas to the EU to displace Russian oil, but also to India and China. We have the resources, the prices, that we have excess capacity. There's plenty of excess capacity in the world. We don't have to let Russia bypass the sanctions. I would also urge us to work with Japan, and the G7 to work with Japan on building out their LNG facilities. And finally, the US and Canada should pledge to work with other G7 nations to develop mineral supply chains to break Chinese and Russian chokeholds on rare earths, uranium, and battery materials. So let me stop there.
Fantastic stuff. And there was a critical minerals action plan announced in June, and I guess we'll see, David, how much progress on that. But before I get to Gabriella, just one important point, because you mentioned that about the tankers, the shadow fleet yesterday. I just read an uncorroborated report yesterday that the French had seized a Russian oil tanker, which it's suspected of hosting the drones that attacked or that were responsible for shutting the Copenhagen airport. So the Europeans might get more interested in watching the shadow fleet. And I know, because we study the Arctic Water Institute, all the Arctic LNG carriers a couple of months ago displaced all the international staff and replaced them with Russian staff. And now I guess we kind of have an idea of why they would want to do that. So great concrete suggestions. Gabrielle, we'll finish this opening round off with you.
I'll keep it as succinct and sweet as possible, but nature is healing. And often at our Center for Energy and Conservation, we have exposed the very nefarious nature and agenda that is assigned to net zero decarbonization policies, because they lead to degrowth, they lead to higher energy prices and scarcity. We could be several generations away from energy scarcity. My family fled the former Soviet Union, so this is very personal to me, from Lithuania. And I'm like 1 to 2 generations removed from having stability that is largely brought about by fossil fuels, coal, natural gas, oil, and also nuclear. And we don't know how good we have it until we don't. And we see a lot of countries that want to rise, even here in North America, and our European friends that are struggling to achieve energy abundance. So nature is healing in that respect, and it's refreshing and quite redeeming to see these entities that had dismissed our concerns about net zero decarbonization, especially through environmental, social, and governance investing here in the United States. We were battling it out with our friends on the left over whether or not that is a sustainable thing to do. Do you want stakeholder capitalism? And that is, we noticed within the last year and a half that as that domino started to fall, you could see this shift to abundance, away from accelerating, to fix a so-called climate catastrophe, now to energy abundance, security, reliability, and nature is healing. And I'll be talking about that in a forthcoming report if any of you are interested here present or those watching. We have a report, comprehensive report on energy abundance, dropping October 20th, if you don't mind me putting a shameless plug. But our center has been on top of this for the past few years. I've worked very closely with other partners, and it's refreshing to see countries, our friends and allies, also adopt a similar energy abundance posture. It's very important. It's not because we're telling you to do this or we're trying to pressure you. I actually am very encouraged by the Trump administration using energy as a leverage point for national security interests, economic, and even environmentalism. The president gave a very harsh dose of reality to the United Nations, and he really slammed net zero and said that if you continue down this road with these policies, it's not just the G7, it's the whole world, and including our European friends. if you continue down this path, you're going to invite scarcity, you're going to invite higher electric bills. I was just in the UK for vacation, and everywhere they still are grappling with net zero. I was using a combined washer dryer, and it took me about 4 or 5 hours combined to wash my small load of laundry. So that's how you know energy and security they're on the cusp of that, especially with their insistence to go net zero. And I think also something we fall into, even let's say on the center right here in America. And my friend and colleague, Andre Bellevue, he and I authored, he's now with Congressman Dan Crenshaw, advising him there. But when he was with a nonprofit that works very closely on energy issues with us, we authored an op-ed warning even center-right people to avoid using all of the above jargon, which does give concessions to net zero if you still want to prioritize solar and wind. So we believe as a center, and I think the posture that everyone is starting to adopt, even the IEA, the chairman there posted a picture with Secretary Chris Wright and said, we're going to be supercharging investments in oil, gas, and nuclear. Very contrasting to their posture to decarbonize, go net zero, because they realize that you need reliable energy to compete with rising demand, to increase and enhance quality of life, and so much more. So we're very excited to see that conversation happening. And it is redeeming that we're finally proven right in the United States about that, but it's healthy for everyone to have this. We don't want to just be basking in energy abundance. We want our friends and allies, we want Canadians to also join us in doing this. We want the G7, and I think especially our European friends to enjoy this, because it's really sad to see that they're grappling with energy insecurity. And that's what abundance brings. And we're having this conversation about maximizing energy here in the United States. And you can do that without despoiling the environment. I go hunting and fishing. I care very deeply about the environmental situation around me. I do not want to see a despoiling of natural resources. And I think where the conversation has steered, unfortunately, is that you can't have economic prosperity through maximizing investments, production, and the like, while maintaining the environment. You absolutely can. I've seen it firsthand with energy workers that I've talked to individually. A lot of them are hunters and anglers. They don't want to see a despoiling of the environment. So abundance, I think, as a posture, can really achieve everything. It could be hunky-dory, and you can have every interest satisfied, national security as well.
Great. Well, thanks all for your opening comments. We'll get into a bit of specifics now, I think, on AI and LNG in particular. A lot of the reason that we're talking about energy in a security context, there's many reasons, but one of them at least is AI. That it's become apparent that the AI race is an energy race. And we have seen very high electricity costs. You can see the data, electricity is increasing. The cost of electricity in the United States is increasing. In Europe, it's been high at least since 2022, probably 2021, which is why Putin took advantage. In Canada, we had the highest electricity prices experienced over the summer. So we're all having more electricity prices. Part of it is because of increased data center demand. Is there a role for the G7? Do you think they'll approach it? Do we think they're seeing AI as an energy issue? And then if you just, or you can talk about LNG, and because that is one of the solutions, I guess, to high energy prices, is that is a way to ship more that would be used for power generation. So I don't know who wants to tackle this one. David, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, if I can. And I'd actually start. I went to university 20 years ago, and at that time the focus was multilateralism for Canada. That was our leverage. That was our point to have a place in the world.
That's what middle powers do.
That's right. That's what we do. And the way I look at it today. In previous cases, and apologies to any diplomats in the room, it was more about symbolism. It was more about the formality, the process of going through a summit to meet and to come out with some important facts, but not necessarily tangible, actionable things that come from it. And then you turn to this year, and it's almost, we're almost taking a business ROI lens to the meeting. Was it effective? What did you actually achieve? What did you get out of it? And so I think this is potentially, we're on the cusp, at least from Canada's perspective, working with our allies, and certainly we hope with the US as well, is a golden age for multilateralism and the need for not just tables like the G7, but other bilateral relationships with like-minded partners over in Europe and elsewhere around the world. When we look to LNG, obviously Canada has an abundance of LNG. One of the, I won't get into the details of it, but there's a new regulatory and legislative process in Canada just introduced where new large build projects get national significance designation attached to it. And that helps it kind of stiff through the system a little bit quicker than the rest of, than what would be a typical path. And one of those projects is liquid natural gas out in BC. Also, we've got another project on that list for a small modular reactor in Bowmanville, just outside where I grew up in the Toronto area. Because I think the government of Canada, and I think it certainly came up at the G7, understand the importance of energy for AI, and also just for powering our cars, our homes, and our businesses. So I think there's a tremendous role to play.
Yeah, well, there is a role. Just none of those things a year ago would have happened.
Absolutely.
That was
That's
quite a 180. Diana, you're looking at me. You have something to add here?
Well, I think it's really interesting that AI is what is making a lot of these governments change their mind and say, yes, nuclear is okay, yes, natural gas is okay. So they could look at the deindustrialization, higher unemployment, high electricity prices that we've seen before the AI revolution started to make headlines. They didn't care about that. And for some reason, they care about AI, which, by the way, some people say is going to at least redistribute jobs. Some people might have more, some people might lose jobs. But it's really fascinating that the competition in AI is what is making these countries change their mind. And we're having a lot of discussion as to whether it should be what we call inside the fence or outside the fence. Should these AI companies be allowed to just build power plants for themselves, or in the case of Microsoft or Constellation, reopen 3 Mile Island primarily for itself? Should it be for itself, or should we improve electricity for everybody? And I think that here, at least in the United States, we have the potential for electricity for everybody. AI should be an incentivator, but we should not focus on these AI companies as just being able to vacuum up all the energy for themselves. We have a practically infinite supply of natural gas. If we redid permitting regulations, we would be able to have a lot faster nuclear power. We used to be able to build a nuclear power plant in 4 years. Now it's taking us 10 to 15. My colleague Jack Spencer has written a book called Nuclear Revolution, which I highly recommend, on how to speed up permitting for nuclear power plants. But it's just fascinating to me that it's AI that's caused these changes, rather than just the specter of deindustrialization, higher unemployment, loss of manufacturing to China, which is our rival.
Great. Thomas?
I'd like to pick up on a couple things Diana said earlier. She noted that China continues to build lots of coal-fired plants. But there is a danger here that if China continues down the path it's been going for 40 years, building coal plants, various forms of destruction of the environment, they continue to have cheap energy, then that's going to be a material consideration in the AI battle that is coming. What I would suggest, and again, back to the G7 context, is that we challenge, as the West, which is the target, if you will, of a lot of what China is doing, in industrial policy, building new institutions, helping the axis of authoritarianism in Russia and Iran. We need to challenge their narrative because, let's face it, with Donald Trump, we've taken some setbacks, I think, in the attractiveness, if you will, of the American model. But we do not have to cede the high ground to the Chinese. We need to challenge them on building all these coal plants. We need to challenge them on building a solar industry on the backs of slave labor to produce silicon in Xinjiang. There are all kinds of things that we need to challenge. I mean, the rare earths, they're using slave labor in Africa, if you will. The processing plants that they build are some of the dirtiest in the world. They're exploiting territories in Myanmar, which are no man's lands that are run by drug gangs. So we just needed to challenge them right up front. And they have this idea, the Chinese, that they're an attractive magnet for the future governance of the world, if you will. And it's just, it's in so many ways a false narrative. And they think that, you know, making a so-called pledge on net zero sometime around 2060 from a base that no one knows what the base is, it keeps growing. Sorry to go on, but this is a perfect, you know, topic, I think, for the G7 energy ministers to talk about.
You make a good point that I hadn't thought about, is the G7 at least has the opportunity to show a better path, better values, better principles, better outcomes than what we're getting. And I wouldn't say that that's something that they've done in the last few years. They haven't really, you know, been able to achieve that or show that. Gabriella, your last thoughts on this
Sure.
question?
Well, I know there are concerns about AI, and rightfully so. We want to have guardrails, we want to ensure that it works, but America has to lead on this, and the energy question really fits into this. And I would wager to say that the advent of AI, or the proliferation of AI, is actually a hidden blessing because it exposed the vulnerabilities of going on a net zero path and brought about this newfound appreciation for natural gas and other reliable baseload dispatchable power. Natural gas is perhaps the most abundant source we have. We have so many proven reserves in billions of cubic feet underground. The issue is, can we bring that up? Can we produce it? Can we extract it? Right now, we're sitting with different bottlenecks. Permitting reform, everyone is talking about, that's a serious issue, which is why we're seeing Congress deliberate this now. We have to build more pipelines in order to get that energy and electricity out there. We have to build more transmission lines. Is there a willingness from certain lawmakers to approve that? That's being debated right now. But it's so abundant, it's a cheap, clean burning fuel, and it's no wonder why all these different tech companies, Microsoft, Google, and the like, are really bullish about it. And I went to a Google meeting on energy earlier this year, and it was very enlightening and refreshing to hear all of them say we need advanced nuclear, more natural gas, geothermal even. I like geothermal. I think it could play into the equation too. And this, I guess, over-reliance on solar and wind is what really put us on a track to be behind China and Russia with respect to nuclear energy proliferation and build-out. Now we see this week a lot of developments with this pilot program from the Department of Energy. Oklo and other companies are getting fast-track approval for different microreactor, small modular templates. And so I think this obsession in the US with solar and wind, which are not reliable, of course, we all know that. They only work when the weather is cooperative. Are too much of a focus on that, put us behind on nuclear. It's a lot of fear-mongering, deprioritization of nuclear, which is the most abundant, most reliable source out there. If we're talking about a potential replacement right now, it's a supplement alongside coal and natural gas. But coal, natural gas, and nuclear collaboratively make up 78% of electricity generation, natural gas being 43%. So it's the most consumed and used and produced. So we have to factor that into the AI question, and even with rising electricity demand. Yes, AI consumes a lot of that, but I think everyone also forgets that air conditioning, military technology, transportation, so many things are also consuming energy. And electricity demand, I want to reassure everyone out there, is not necessarily a bad thing. It means that we're progressing, we're advancing, there's a lot of prosperity. But even as we increase prosperity, we can still address the concerns of not having enough infrastructure by more build-outs. And like I said, the more we build out, especially here in the United States, overall for our environmental quality, it's much better than importing slave labor, relying on other countries that don't abide by the same standards as us. We can have quality control. And again, it's very good for national security interests, which we'll go into. But yes, the G7 will have to reconcile with the fact that a source that they maligned, that they thought was contributing to a so-called climate catastrophe, is actually what is going to be saving their countries and their grids from collapsing.
Fantastic. So I want to move on to this discussion, and you alluded to it, Gabriella, but on the climate environment. And I'll be frank, you know, Canada's come a long way towards pragmatism in the last year, but it will still be important for this government, and I'm sure they'll still want to put in their agenda a focus on climate and the environment. Coming from mostly conservative center-right think tanks, as I am, I'd be curious your thoughts on how you think, what would appeal to Trump, or what is a discussion on environment, you know, that where you could find consensus in this G7 meeting? What is the language? What are the tactics? Where is there still some common ground on climate and environment? Gabriella, we'll start. We'll go with the other opposite.
I was looking over the agenda. There are several areas. There's biodiversity, which could also factor in hunting as a conservation tool, and addressing endangered species, threatened species, and ways to ensure that there's no crisis with respect to that. There's also the question of forest management, which I know is very important for all of us. Canada is sadly sending a lot of high-intensity wildfire smoke our way. So I know that that's a conversation as well. And forest management also is very mindful when you have a regime in place. Bilateral agreements to ensure more cooperation would be really key, because in Quebec, I think the management hasn't really been as good as, let's say, what we have here. And for the last 4 years, until we had this new administration come in, we had this lackadaisical approach to fire management. And so I think there could be cooperation in those areas. And I think also, again, kind of like delineating climate from energy, more so focusing on conservation and energy development, because climate is a triggering word, and I'm not trying to say that to be insensitive or fearmonger, but the more people hear about climate, the less they're inclined to actually care about their natural surroundings. I've seen this poll tested, I've had this in conversations. People just respond better to conservation. So I think talking about actual conservation efforts will get more cooperation across a whole set of issues, whether it's production, forest management, and even biodiversity.
You're right that I think at the G7 in Kananaskis, wildfire management was the metaphor for environment. That's what they settled on. Tom or Diana, any thoughts on this?
Go.
Please, go ahead.
I'll just be short because I haven't thought a lot about this, and trying to understand what motivates Donald Trump is sometimes difficult. But he likes to make deals, and I would think in terms of building infrastructure between Canada and the United States. I mean, we could benefit, I think, on both sides from better electric power transmission across the borders. I mean, Canada's had a drought in the east, right? And you're importing electricity from us.
BC has, for 2 years in a row, been a net importer of electricity. Yes.
So the infrastructure, I think, could use some development. Also, we, the United States, refine a lot of oil coming from Canada, and we could use a pipeline or two there as well to facilitate that. I think Trump would be sensitive to concrete proposals to make those things happen.
Diana?
Well, if we look at what motivates President Trump, it's common sense. And what he has instructed his agencies to do, the Energy Department and the Environmental Protection Agency, is to take another look at this, quote, endangerment finding, unquote. This is a finding that says greenhouse gases adversely affect human health. This is essential to all these climate proposals. And President Trump, I would imagine, is not likely to go to the G7 and give up his views on the endangerment finding. The Department of Energy published a lengthy study showing how there are not more hurricanes, not more tornadoes than there used to be. The seas are not rising because of greenhouse gases, and many other aspects that most people consider sacrosanct. So I think that what's going to happen is the EPA now is considering different regulations. They've put out notices of proposed rulemaking on power plants and motor vehicle emissions. And the central tenet of this is that we don't have to be concerned about these greenhouse gas emissions because they do not significantly affect human health. My colleague Kevin Dyer-Ratner has published a book, Cooling the Climate Hysteria, where we have other climate scientists with papers on different aspects of the pros and cons of greenhouse gas emissions. So I think climate is going to play a central role in what the G7 does. And I think that if the United States moves away from net zero on the grounds that new data has shown that greenhouse gases do not endanger human health or the environment, this is going to push the rest of the world to go along. Otherwise, they're going to be left further behind in terms of their electricity costs, their manufacturing costs, the state of their economic growth, and the economy. And I mean, some of the things that people say are true. Yes, there is more hurricane damage than there used to be. But that's because instead of building a $50,000 house on the coast of Florida, which someone might have done 50 years ago, someone now builds a $5 million house. So the same hurricane comes along and it causes $5 million in damage. But it doesn't mean that greenhouse gases have affected the intensity of that hurricane. Steve Koonin has a book which I would recommend called Unsettled, where he has numerous graphs of some of these phenomena, wildfires, hurricanes, tornadoes, sea level rises, and shows that there really is not that much difference. Greenland used to be called Greenland, green, because it was warm in those days. So the climate is changing. It's been changing for millennia. But the central question of how much these greenhouse gases, CO2, methane, affected is still an unsettled question. And we drink CO2 in our sodas every day. I don't think that it has done a lot of us much harm, except maybe it's made our waistlines a little bit bigger. And greenhouse gases are a tiny fraction, less than 1% of the atmospheric gases. Now, this is a very unpopular view. After Kevin Dyraton and I published a paper explaining this endangerment push, I got uninvited to a National Association of Business Economists conference later this month. So this is something that people should not be saying, but we need to look at the data. We have new data now. We need to at least look at it.
David, I'm going to rely on you for a Canadian perspective on this, and how are we grappling with this?
Absolutely, and grapple is the right word. I think first and foremost, I think we acknowledge there's probably not going to be consensus at the table at the G7 at the push. And I think everybody's okay with that. I think there will be, as I said earlier, when you talk about multilateralism in this new context, there'll be tangible environmental efforts that can be done, protecting oceans, fire management, things like that the table will agree on. In Canada's context, I've been involved or working directly in federal politics in Canada for 20 years, 25 years. And I can say I have never seen the public mood in Canada like it is today. There is an interest to build pipelines across the country, to the point that the oil industry is saying, we don't actually need one exactly where you want to put it. But that has not happened in forever. And from our end, it's almost a pragmatic approach we're taking, where this is our window to build, so let's do it and let's go. And so we're trying not to aggravate. We're trying to make sure that things are done sustainably and cleanly. We were up at the oil sands back in the spring. If the facility was on that corner block, you would not even notice it. Mm-hmm. The technology is incredible. It looks like a regular commercial building. There's no smoke. There's few people. It's all electronic. The main team works in a room like this with TVs all over the room, and they track things and the like. It's incredible. And that technology Canada has, and we can pull resources out of the ground to meet our economic needs today, and do it in a way that it doesn't inflame the political debate that unfortunately we've had over the past 20, 25 years in Canada. That's really, I think, been the cornerstone of the problem, getting our resources to market.
Great, awesome. I was also at Christina Lake, Sonova.
That's right,
so
we did.
I think about 90% of the oil sands is underground, which is why it looks like forest mostly with some pipes on top. But okay, as a Canadian, I can't help. We love to hear what Americans think of Canada. But my penultimate question, Canada's role. So this is a G7 energy meeting. Canada is leading it. We do have energy. We do have critical minerals. And we are refocusing, as David has alluded to, finally, our foreign and domestic policy on minerals and energy development, and it enjoys extremely high support, frankly, in Canada. Most pollings are 70 or 80% range. As I say, motherhood and apple pie numbers. What do you think Canada can and should offer our allies? How are we best positioned? How would you recommend Canada position itself in this milieu? And I don't know who wants to start. Diana, you're looking at me, so I got to pick you.
Sure. Well, the North American energy platform is the ideal. So Canada has its tar sands. It has heavy crude. We have refineries. Mexico also has heavy crude. We can refine all that here. We are the oil exporter. We are the energy dominator. We can basically power not just ourselves, but our allies. 10 years ago, if anyone had told me that we were going to be a net exporter of oil and natural gas, I wouldn't have believed them. But now we are. And it's all due to technology. And the North American platform is vital, together with the combinations of oil in Canada, light crude here, refineries in the United States, sour crude from Mexico. This is this is really game-changing.
Great, thanks. Gabriella?
I'll speak to the critical minerals component too, because North America has to lead here. I think everyone wants to decouple from China and other countries that have a monopoly, but China has an outsized monopoly. I think we're recognizing it from a national security standpoint, energy standpoint, economic standpoint, that having this reliance on China invites a lot of problems. With respect to energy, a few months ago, there was a report in Reuters that showed that Chinese solar panels and components are kill switches. This is not, I thought this was conspiratorial, but that kind of is a wake-up call to a lot of people, and similar with the critical minerals component, which is why we're having this conversation and the invoking of FAST 41, which is a mechanism to approve more projects. Emily Domenech, who is the chair of the Permitting Council, is very, very savvy. She's the right person, I think, for the job, and she's been approving different projects there to fast-track more projects. But we have a couple proposed projects, and it takes 29 years in the United States. I'm not sure how much in Canada, but on average, it takes 29 years to approve a new critical mine, which is absurd. We should not be doing that. And again, it's because we were toying with net zero in this country, we ignored the critical minerals component, shoring up more nuclear energy, which would really help us be indomitable and also secure and safe. And also at my center, we're going to be putting out a policy focus. My colleague Megan Mobbs, who handles our national security portfolio, director of our center there, we're combining our efforts together to simplify why we need to have more critical minerals sourced here in the United States. And we can do it. It'll take a couple years. And granted, if permitting reform works in our favor, we could see more projects be brought back. There's one tentatively for Wyoming. California has the only existing critical mineral facility. There's more potential out there. So we could stop importing, I think it's 10,000 tons of critical minerals, especially rare earth elements from China each year, which is about 70%, give or take, not be dependent on them. And I think Canada's also going to wrestle with that question. I'm not sure what percentage you rely on China. But for that, especially coupled with energy, if we could onshore that back, that doesn't mean we're going to be isolated. We're not going to have deals. We're not going to engage in the free markets. We just need to lead so China doesn't monopolize and other countries come to both Canada and the United States for these resources. Because again, we do this much better, more effectively. You can't question the labor force. We do it effectively, ethically. And again, it's going to be better for the environment. Because you see those horrific images from Africa, the slave labor and the destructive pits from the different critical mines out there, the mines out there. So we won't have that in the United States or Canada. So I think that's something they have to hone in on, bringing that back.
Awesome. Tom?
Well, I would just follow up on Gabriella's point. We have something to offer us, the other G7 colleagues, which is the ability to meet these critical needs. I mean, not just critical minerals, but Europe needs oil and gas. They need energy. And Japan, for that matter, needs energy as well. Plus, the Europeans, the Japanese, others on the Pacific Rim know that China is a threat. And so they don't want to be dependent on China. And we can offer collectively, I think, but especially North America has something to offer both of those regions, which is the ability to steer clear of Russian, Chinese dominance. It's good for our economies to develop all these resources. It's good for us to not be dependent on adversaries, and China is an adversary. So working out solutions to those, freeing us from those dependencies, I think, is very much in the collective interests of U.S. and Canada.
Yeah, I'll just mention one thing before I go to David. Is the United States has given 7 DPA awards to Canadian critical mineral projects in the last 2.5 years. So we're aligned at least on that front. David, do we have strategy in Canada? Are we finally looking at this issue strategically?
I sure hope we have a strategy. The one thing I think that's really important, I'm sure there's a lot of people from the private sector in this room, we speak all the time of government. It's the private sector that's going to put the money up, and they're taking the risk, at least in the most case. And the biggest challenge that we've heard, and we've seen a couple cases recently in Canada, where big resource companies are saying, you know what, the risk is too high. Too much risk, we'll pull money off, issue a dividend, cut staff. And that is the result of ambiguity around regulation, ambiguity around direction, what's happening. And so the we hope this ministers' meeting in October is an opportunity to help share more clearly what that plan is and what that strategy is, and to help almost alleviate some of that anxiety that's in industry right now about whether or not, and this is not a shot at the U.S. administration, the tariffs and the fact that they come out every day differently in different sectors creates that anxiety. And Canada, of course, we've got the same issue. So I certainly hope that no matter what, the focus of G7 countries and their ministers is to use that table to find those opportunities where like-minded nations can collaborate and solve our own problems. We shouldn't be importing into North America most of these minerals. They're here. We should be able to get them ourselves.
Plus, we can make batteries now with completely US-made components.
Yeah.
There are kinds of batteries you can make using lithium, which we can get from North Carolina. We can process here that do not need cobalt. We need to be focusing on these different technologies, and they cost the same as Chinese batteries.
We have some cobalt in Canada.
We have a little bit, just a bit.
Okay, last question before we move on to our next panel. The G7 is a multilateral institution. David, you gave a full-throated, approval for that approach, which is a very Canadian approach. Trump has obviously had a much more isolationist policy. And so I'm wondering, from all your perspectives, what does the U.S. still want or need from the G7, and in particular, but on energy and minerals, but in general too. David, I'm going to start with you and come all the way down the line so you can articulate why the G7 would be such a great place for the United States to lead and to collaborate.
Yeah, but that's it. It's a table for the U.S. to lead, and it's a table to find opportunities to collaborate amongst like-minded nations. That is the essence of the G7, and of course that's going to be there kind of ongoing. I think as the current discussion on tariffs and trade negotiations kind of carries on, once that starts to settle and we're working from a position where we know what the trade deals are, we know what the terms are, then we'll be able to find those deals at the table. And I think, again, as I said, I think this is the beginning of a golden era for multilateralism.
Well, we'll hear from the other three panelists, and I'll just say, I've heard a lot from you about how America has these supplies, America has this energy. There is certainly a slant of wanting to do it all yourself on energy and minerals. What value do you think the G7 brings? But sanctions was one example, so I'll go down the line, Diana.
Sure. Well, I think that when you have members of the G7, in particular in Europe, coming to the United States, coming to President Trump saying, we want you to help with defense against Russia, at the same time as they are whittling down their economies with their net zero and electric vehicle mandates, then it doesn't make any sense. And I think that's one thing that President Trump might want from the G7 to say, if you want us to help with your defense, if you want us to help you in these different areas, then why don't you abandon some of your policies that mean that you have less money to defend yourselves? I think that's one important question. Another important question is the regulations that Europe puts on American companies. There's the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive. Sounds very complicated. What it means is that as of 2029, any company, American and otherwise, with more than $500 million of business in Europe will have to abide by the net zero goals of the EU. They will have to restructure their operations so they aim for a net zero. And this is basically a colonialism. This is treating the United States like colonials. And America became independent almost 250 years ago and should not be under the thumb of these EU regulations. Then there's other reporting requirements, Scope 1, Scope 2, Scope 3. American companies have to report all their emissions, the emissions of their contractors, the emissions of their contractors, and one mistake, you're hit with big fines, and it's impossible to do it accurately. How do you know if your contractor's contractor has maybe purchased some materials in Indonesia rather than in Germany, leading to different kinds of emissions requirements? So it's vitally important that America keep its sovereignty, keep its dominance, and fight off these rules. And I would suggest that Perhaps Congress passes a law saying that American companies are not allowed to comply with these EU climate regulations, because it's a way of forcing the European agenda on the United States as the United States is trying to break free.
Thank you, Diana. Tom?
Let me sort of go out on a limb a little bit here, but I think what has happened in the last couple of months geopolitically is that there's been a demonstration on the part of the axis of authoritarianism, and I don't know what the right term, how we want to call this, but the friendship between Xi and Putin, that it's here to stay, that they're not changing. And if the president wants to achieve his sort of longer term goals, making deals, pushing back, not allowing the Chinese and the Russians to dominate not only Asia, but they're moving into South Asia, Africa, Latin America. He's going to need help. The president is going to need help. And in a way, Putin has done him a favor by basically thumbing his nose at his peace plan for the Ukraine. So both in terms, I would say too, economically, what's too easily dismissed as isolationism, but maybe Trump really thinks that we can dominate all of these industries and bring all these industries back. We still are going to need outlets. We're going to need markets. So both in terms of the geopolitics of the long-term battle against China, Russia, Iran, North Korea for that matter, and others, both in terms of the economy and the future political order, we're going to need friends. And I think Trump and his team are starting to move more in that direction. They're realizing that they can't, have 50% tariffs on the rest of North America and that sort of thing. Slowly moving in that direction of coming back to a more multilateral approach with our Democratic friends.
Well, we'd appreciate that, Tom.
Well,
So thanks
we'll
for saying
see.
it.
We'll see.
Gabriella?
Quickly, I want to kind of reassure those in the audience here and those watching that I think the American understanding of the president's and his administration's posture on foreign policy should mean America first does not mean America alone. And we have debates here in the United States, even among the center-right. What does that mean? And I think the president and his administration are increasingly seeing through energy and other derivatives that you cannot be alone. I've seen gestures in countries like the Baltics and others say, Mr. President, we will be helping to pressure our European neighbors to buy more American energy or to source things more domestically. So I don't think he's necessarily as isolated, but he's starting to realize the reality that China and Russia are very threatening. He knew this before in his first term. He needed a little bit of a wake-up call or perhaps a reminder with the recent Alaska summit. But those two are combined and joined at the hip. They renewed their relationship in 2021. I don't recall the formal title of it, but they've strengthened their ties. A reverse Nixon is not going to work to separate them. That's why he has more publicly gestured that he wants Ukraine even to reabsorb its territories that Russia illegally took. So I think we are starting to see a more cohesive foreign policy, less isolationist, more America first, kind of this like middle ground of strategic interventionism when appropriate, but still American interests are at hand. So I think he's using energy as a leverage point. And we will see less isolationism. Like I said, I think there is debate in the United States that isolationism invites appeasement. We see this in other areas, even outside of energy and the Russia-Ukraine discussion. So I think there's starting to be a more cohesive message because they realize that having good faith negotiations with bad actors like Russia is not working, so you can only extend your niceness to an extent. So I think he's coming back home. I don't think he was always going to be, trying to appeal to Putin and Xi. But reality bites, and reality is forcing him to say, like, you have to use energy as a leverage, and you can't be isolationist.
Well, thank you all for your thoughts. I can assure you that in Canada, we are still very committed to the Western Alliance and the liberal world order, and I'd like to be a partner in that. Please join me in thanking the panelists.
Heather, if I may, would you all be open to taking a couple questions from the audience before we reset? Okay, great. We have somebody here with a microphone. If you would like to ask a question, I would, and maybe we have 3 people ask questions and then you answer them.
Okay.
And we do it all in 5 minutes.
Get
So
all 3
please,
lightning
please,
round.
please state your name, as succinct a question as possible, and then we'll hit everybody here and then
With
and
as
then give an
succinct an
opportunity.
answer as possible.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, right behind you there first. Right there. That gentleman.
Hi, I'm Miss Jane. Heather, I've been just following you around different cities, I think, Calgary, Ottawa, DC. The question is, in Canada, there's a major push by the so-called new Liberal government to build out energy infrastructure and reduce reliance on the United States. That means building out east-west and north to the Arctic instead of down-south and out. Does this infrastructure push increase overall North American export capacity, or does it create redundancies and inefficiencies in the market? And is sovereignty worth the cost of such potential inefficiencies? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's question 1. Question 2, we have 2 people right here in this second row, and then we'll throw a 4th in the back, and then that's probably all we'll be able to take. So please, name, organization, and question, please.
Sure. My name is Trevor Kolodny. I currently work for the Department of Homeland Security, or employed by them. Quick question regarding the ship-to-ship transfers. I was just wondering if you might have a little bit more perspective on, first of all, why these countries are looking the other way when it comes to the ship-to-ship transfers, number 1. Number 2, the countries you mentioned, which were, Spain, Malta, Greece, they're not actually, and there was a 4th one, I didn't quite catch it, but they're not actually G7 members. I know they're part of the EU, which I understand attends these meetings, but so what exactly is the scope for the G7 actually to take action, given that these countries are not G7 countries? And the 3rd question I would have is, even if these countries did, crack down on these transfers, wouldn't the transfers just end up occurring elsewhere, somewhere either outside of the Mediterranean, perhaps?
Hi, thank you very much. Sophie Hemmer, Embassy of Germany. I'm the Energy Counselor. My question goes in a similar direction. Mr. Duesenberg, you mentioned that the EU should more intensively stop importing Russian gas or put more pressure on other countries. And as you all know, Germany stopped importing Russian gas right after the war. We're very proud of how fast we built our import terminals, and at the moment, 95% of our LNG is coming from the United States. And that being said, Germany has no interest. Our Chancellor was very clear in spring that we have no interest in reusing Nord Stream. So we are supporting the Repower EU legislations, stopping any energy or any fossil fuel imports from Russia by end of 2027 to the EU. That being said, your president at the same time is very engaged in ending the war in Ukraine. Do you see any scenario where President Putin could agree to end this war when there is no possibility of importing Russian gas to the region? Again, emphasizing that Germany has no interest in buying Russian gas. We have been overly depending on Russian gas. We don't want to do that again.
Okay, thank you. And then the gentleman in the back of the room right there. And then you'll have to figure out how to answer all of these in
I'll be very quick.
couple of
Lou
minutes.
Pugliese, Energy Policy Research Foundation. What about the G7 and energy poverty? Should they authorize multilateral assistance for coal development in Africa?
Great questions. Maybe we'll try to just, David, if you could answer the Canadian one. Thomas, there's a few for you to answer. Diana, I think maybe the multilateral finance one. And Gabriella, you can
The
choose
Russia
which.
one,
Yeah, perfect.
Great. I'll be as quick as I can because it's a very well put together question. I think sovereignty needs to trump, no pun intended, all other things at the moment. We have pipelines that do cross into the U.S., and of course that does undermine our ability to export and to get our goods to market. So the Canadian Chamber, we're certainly supportive of that. The debate that's happening in Canada is the oil industry saying they don't need it right now. And so that's creating an interesting conversation. But In the end, we want to make sure we're self-reliant. Our supply chains are critical. We can't have breakpoints like that. And so that's kind of where I think it'll go.
Thanks. Tom?
Okay, ship-to-ship transfers. I'm aware that the G7 doesn't, I didn't implicate any of the G7 countries, but the European Union itself, and I can't cite chapter and verse of the EU rules, but Spain and Greece are members of the European Union, and the EU has deep interest in resisting what the Russians are doing, both in terms of the war, but in terms of selling oil to adversaries like China. So I see that as a EU project. I use the term looking the other way. Spain is deeply involved in this, and there may be ideological reasons for that with the current government. I'm not an expert here, so I really don't know, but that is the leading area just outside the Straits of Gibraltar, where all these a lot of the transfers are taking place, coming from Eastern Russian oil. Will it drive transactions elsewhere? The study that I cited by S&P also, I think it's that study, noted that the sanctions have driven a lot of the ships in the shadow fleet sort of out of business. And something like, there was a 48% drop in the use of the shadow fleet in this year, in 2025, according to their statistics. So that just drives the exports into sanctionable ships, and we still have a price cap. And Russia will just have to meet the price cap, and I think Europe just lowered the price cap. Okay, for the German question, I'm fully aware and appreciative of Germany's efforts to free itself from Russian oil. Your question, I think, was if Putin makes a deal. It's a big if, but I can't rule it out. I don't understand exactly how he can survive and keep this war going, but there's a global market for energy. I mean, he doesn't have to sell to Europe. Part of my point was that we in the G7, but mainly North America, we have plenty of resources that we could meet a lot of the demand. If China doesn't buy from us, they're going to buy somewhere. There is a global market, so I don't think that's a huge concern for trying to craft our policy vis-a-vis Vladimir Putin.
Great, thanks. We're down to about a minute each for Diana and Gabriella.
Okay, if I could take the energy poverty question,
Yeah.
Excellent question. It's condescending of the UN, the Europeans, to say that Africa can make do with wind and solar when the rest of the Western world manages on fossil fuels and nuclear power. There was the UN's Net Banking Alliance, a group of 140 banks that pledged they would not lend for fossil fuels and nuclear power in Africa. The World Bank does not lend for nuclear power, and it's difficult for it to lend for fossil fuels in African and Latin American countries and other emerging economies. In order for these countries to reach the standards of living of the West, they need to have access to their fuels. Banks need to feel free to lend. The World Bank needs to feel free to lend, to use natural resources, to have coal-fired power plants, natural gas-fired power plants, nuclear power plants, and this will also help stem the migration pressures from the global south to Europe and North America, because these pressures come as these countries do not have manufacturing jobs to support their people in prosperity, so they look for fossil fuel-rich areas where there is prosperity and jobs. So this does need to change.
And I can't help but plug, we have a paper that we just published on this topic, and the main recommendation is for multilateral financial institutions to be able to finance fossil fuels in the developing world again. Last quick word to you.
Yes, but to the question about Europe weaning itself off of Russia, I remember seeing a political article that said that Putin is the greatest green champion for his invasion in Ukraine. And when I saw that, as someone of Baltic heritage, I couldn't help but shrug. But also the fact that this continued reliance with some countries, not all, but Germany is under your new chancellor. I'm very, very excited about what he's doing, his posture. He's kind of lambasted the EU to deregulate. He also is kind of a climate skeptic, which is very refreshing from an American standpoint. And other countries in Central Eastern Europe are also pressuring their Western European friends, Belgium, France, and the like, to stop buying and taking in imports from Russia. But it'll spur the conversation of buying energy from us in the United States, but also I think we can share the wealth with respect to energy abundance posture. So Europe should look to restart nuclear, which is already happening, and also divvy up on coal and natural gas. Like, they shouldn't be afraid as well to do that. So you want to really undermine Russia, destabilize their energy markets, start building more in your continent as well, and borrow our posture.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to the panel. And with that, we'll move from multilateralism to bilateralism, and I'll bring Jamie up to introduce the next panel. Thanks so much.
Now that my mic's on, reintroducing myself, I'm Jamie Tronis. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for North American Prosperity and Security, which is a project of the Canadian-based Macdonald-Laurier Institute. The last panel focused on G7 priorities and the opportunities that might come with them. I'd like to keep some of that theme going, but this time zooming in onto our own continent. I'm joined today by three incredible panelists. Tim Stewart in the middle is the president of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association and founding partner of the Bennett Consulting Group and a partner at the American Capital Group. Tim has an extensive background in energy and the natural resource space, having previously served as the legislative director and chief of staff for the House Committee on Natural Resources, one of his many roles on the Hill. And fun fact, Tim was once on a TV show that Brigham and I were supposed to be on, but we got cut for time because Tim was way too interested. So I figured we'd put him on this panel. Dr. Heather Exner-Perot, who you've already met, is a senior fellow at CNAPS and the director of Energy, Natural Resources, Environment at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. She's also a special advisor to the Business Council of Canada, a research advisor to the Indigenous Resources Network, and sits on the Arctic Advisory Council. And fun fact about Heather, she's so famous in Canada, there are literally people in this room who flew down from Canada to see her, and the CBC sent a news crew. So you're very lucky.
B-roll, everyone.
And of course, Brigham McCown, who we all know is the senior fellow and director of the Initiative on American Energy Security here at the Hudson Institute and a professor of practice at Miami University. He's also the founder and CEO of the Alliance for Innovation and Infrastructure, an organization that drives nonpartisan solutions for infrastructure and energy policy. He's a former CEO overseeing pipelines in Alaska and a sought-after commentator on energy and energy policy. And fun fact about Brigham is he's not just incredibly smart, but he's a former naval officer and aviator, which means that he can pilot both a plane and a ship, which is amazing to me because I can barely parallel park. So let's begin. America is energy dominant. We learned that last year at our North American Energy Preeminence Forum. But America also wants to be AI dominant. And that means we're going to have to muster all the energy that we can as AI data centers are sucking endeavors for energy. Correspondingly, the Trump administration has ambitious energy plans. The establishment of the Energy Dominance Council in February has paved the way for the president's priorities when it comes to drill, baby, drill, and beyond. Interior Secretary Doug Burgum and Energy Secretary Chris Wright have their work cut out for them. They have to assert American energy dominance, keep gas prices low, keep America drilling, and ensure that America continues to be a major exporter. In a recent speech, Energy Secretary Wright announced that he intends to double the exports of American natural gas within 5 years. So I'd like to turn to Brigham. What sort of efforts are underway right now to make sure that North American energy dominance from the American side continues to thrive?
Yeah, thank you. That's a tall order, isn't it? And a big question. You know, Several months ago, I was up in Alaska where we were having a fireside chat with the governor of Alaska, and I was interviewing him at his energy resources event, and we were talking about, particularly how Alaska could lead and how untapped natural gas from Alaska could be used for domestic or export markets. And he said, the governor said, it's been really hard. We've been looking at a pipeline for 30 years. And I said, well, do you think you have it now? And he said, I think so. And he said, because the current administration is cutting through all the red tape, taking a whole of government approach to it. And as I said that, I looked into the front office, and there was Secretary Burgum, Secretary Wright, Secretary Zeldin, or Administrator Zeldin. And I said, well, do you think you're getting love? Do you think? He goes, yes, absolutely. We've never had this before. And I think whether it's Alaska or other places, certainly there is a huge movement to truly unleash American power. A couple of cautionary perspectives, however, is that red tape reductions and regulatory rollbacks are easier seen than done sometimes. And secondly, as a recovering federal regulator, sometimes there are unintended consequences to rolling things back. But to try to take some permitting reforms from years to weeks in some cases is very interesting. And it remains to be seen how that will play out across America, which in some respects, when it comes to energy infrastructure and energy itself, has become quite local. The politics have become quite local. We've seen pipelines blocked in South Dakota, traditionally by red state voters. We've seen other efforts, either it's not green enough or it's too green, back and forth. So I think, we are certainly seeing broader export and production momentum, but as many of you all know, it's not a spigot that you can just turn on overnight. It requires investment. It requires price stability, and most of all, it requires political and regulatory certainty, something which is not necessarily common around Washington, D.C. these days.
Well, I'd like to turn to the Canada side. The recently completed Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project and the Coastal GasLink Pipeline are beginning to diversify Canada's export market beyond the United States. Prime Minister Carney's government has made major national projects a priority for his government. The new Major Projects Office, which is auspiciously built in the Canada's Oil and Gas Centre of Gravity in Calgary, shout out to Alberta, recently came out with a list of priority projects, but to the dismay of many, and probably many in this room, a new pipeline wasn't on it yet. We've heard it from Brigham about the American incentives to keep energy flowing. Can you tell us, Heather, a little bit about what the Canadian investment environment is looking like for expansion and how Canada is trying to encourage energy companies looking to build pipelines or expand their energy production?
Great question. There's lots of people in this room that could also easily answer that question, but I'll give you the political scientist perspective instead of the corporate. One thing of interest is that we are building a pipeline in Canada, the Prince Rupert Gas Transmission, which would feed a new LNG plant, Silesums, which was just approved last week. So that's a big deal. So we are, if all the proposed and approved LNG terminals on the BC West Coast go forward, that would, we're just about, we don't really need too many more for a couple of years. We'd be pretty full up and there'd be lots of room for expansion. How is the mood? I will say politically, there was disappointment that the Liberals were reelected after a decade, we call it the lost decade of poor environmental regulation. The Carney government has taken a very different tone, very different rhetoric, which usually we say we are cautiously optimistic about. Some days more cautious, other days more optimistic. And I would say right now it's probably market forces that are weighing on the mood. Natural gas prices have been negative in Western Canada for the last couple of weeks, literally paying people to store our natural gas because we don't have enough egress to get it to markets, which would pay, I don't know, I guess a bazillion times more than -1 penny if you just do the math. So desperately trying to get natural gas to any market, including the United States. We will never run out. of natural gas. We will never run out of oil. We're looking far beyond a century of reserves. So Canada can export west. It can export in every direction. That will not detract from our ability to export south. It's definitely not a zero-sum game. And I'll just say, just this week, Imperial announced, Imperial is the Exxon's Canadian division. They announced obviously some cutbacks. So is ConocoPhillips, so has Chevron, so has BP. Everyone is facing the same structural low price environment. That's not probably a Canadian problem. That's probably a global problem. Everyone's cutting back, but it is disappointing. You know, it is tough times, I would say, and I'll be curious on your perspectives. A little bit tough times at $65 a barrel in the oil and gas industry. The last thing I'll say, though, is that the oil sands and most production in Canada is still very healthy at $65 a barrel, that we spent the last 10 years reducing costs and now are a very competitive barrel and could probably withstand prices even in the 50s without having to shut in production.
Excellent. So yeah, now it's time to turn to Tim. What sorts of things are you hearing from the members of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association about increasing their production in the U.S. and or Canada? And if you could also kind of talk about what Heather had talked about a little bit in terms of the price and how some of those incentives are either causing them to cut back or scale back, or whether or not the incentives from different administrations are causing them to push forward and increase production.
Sure. You know, U.S. Oil and Gas Association is the nation's oldest trade association, going back to 1917. We predate API and AXPC and everybody else. Odds are, and you look at my membership, it's interesting. We are largely actually the privately held legacy family companies. We have publicly traded companies who are members as well. But if there's a name on a petroleum engineering building somewhere in the United States, odds are that it's probably the name of the grandfather of one of my board members. And one thing I've learned as I've worked with this board is they are excellent at wringing their hands, okay? They are really, really good about worrying about the price environment. But we started this conversation talking about the AI world. And I think AI is a perfect example of no matter how uncertain the price environment is, it is a fool's errand to bet against this industry. Because as you go back 20 years, 30 years of U.S. energy policy. My good friend Jerry Prouty, 25 years ago, he and I started working here in the United States to talk about North American energy dominance and the role that Canada was playing in the U.S. And Jerry and I did outreach. We took members up to the oil sands. It was a different time in the U.S. industry. We're facing something very different. If you would have told me 18 months ago that I'd be hanging out with this Baptist and bootlegger coalition that has formed between the crypto bros in Silicon Valley and my board members, I would never have believed it. But the reality is big tech has realized that they cannot get from here to there without us. You cannot have a weather-dependent source of energy without, you need stability. So it's been really interesting in the last 18 months of how we've been rediscovered as being sexy. So $65 barrel oil, yeah, it's tough for a lot of the shale producers, but that doesn't mean things aren't going to change. The old saying is the best solution for low oil prices is low oil prices. And what that does is that pushes us to innovate even further. It's cyclical. It is written in the books. It is commandment that whenever we go into a low price environment, the American energy sector, particularly my guys, will innovate their way out of that low price environment. It's been fascinating to watch. I know you want to get into tariffs and things like that. There are some obstacles there. Permitting reform is going to be fascinating too, and we can talk about that. But the board members of the U.S. Oil and Gas Association are wringing their hands, but they also realize that now's the time where they'll make some adjustments and they'll get through an uncertain price environment like this.
Yes, I want to talk to everybody about the elephant in the room, the tariff dispute, and the deterioration of the relationship between Canada and the United States. It is true that North American energy dominance can only be maintained if Canada remains a major supplier of crude oil and natural gas to the United States. With tariffs and the current dispute going unresolved, certainty has been lacking in the market, something that Brigham talked about as well. Not just for drilling, but for building an investment. So I'd love to open this to everybody on the panel. How can our two countries overcome these issues on the energy file to ensure we're moving forward to meet upcoming demand? Brigham, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I mean, the first thing that we can do is set aside the rhetoric and understand that we have an integrated North American energy network already, right? That is both crude oil, gas, refined product, electricity flowing back and forth across the two countries. If we put the United States and Canada together and can all get on the same page, not only are we North American and no disrespect to our friends in Mexico, if we could get U.S. and Mexico on the same, or U.S. and Canada on the same page, and then more stable conditions in Mexico later would be the icing on top of the cake. But North America is completely not only energy independent, but truly is energy dominant and can supply our allies to the east in Europe and to the west in Asia with responsibly developed energy sources at an affordable price for, you said centuries. You said you've got more oil and gas than you could ever use.
We do.
Man, we haven't even talked about uranium, critical minerals, and everything else.
Uranium too, yeah, put it on the
So,
list.
yeah, if we can get past the family dispute and truly integrate Canada and the U.S. starting out, it'd be a hugely great deal. I think there are some headwinds aside from the tariffs and some, quite frankly, some of the conversation that has occurred here in the U.S. toward Canada is frankly not helpful. But the real headwinds, I do think low prices can be a headwind. You see market consolidation sometimes. I think another headwind is the infrastructure development that truly needs to occur. And to all of my friends in the electricity or gas distribution transmission side, there's a habit of just saying, oh my gosh, we have to do this. It's for safety, to reduce methane emissions, to do A, to do B. Let's just pass this along in the tariff rate to the cost structure. We could very easily in the United States get to a point where the majority of our energy bills are not even from the product itself, but from all of these add-ons. And if you look especially at natural gas distribution, the investment in the infrastructure to replace aging pipes has gone through the roof. And typically regulators just say, sure, 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 sure. We have to have an incentive, though, to continue to create an efficient supply chain, and that includes pipelines. And I'll stop there.
Tim?
So on the tariff issue, you know, the Trump campaign ran largely on energy prices and won because of our ability to, and they told us that. What I have been saying to them is, look, we're with you when it comes to the concept of reshoring an American manufacturing sector. In fact, the oil and gas industry in the United States is probably the best example of that, where, with all due respect, Jerry, you know, 15, 20 years ago, we were talking about what North American energy dominance has, and the market dynamics changed, and the shale revolution happened. And instead of talking about LNG import facilities, we're now building LNG export facilities. Our industry is the best example of what it takes to reshore a manufacturing sector. And we are a manufacturing sector. Where our soft underbelly is we have not reshored the supply chain that supports that manufacturing sector. And that takes time. And that's the message we've been trying to say to the administration over and over again, is we can't just physically lift a barite mining operation and put it in the United States. That's not how it works. We need time to do that. We need time to be able to, we need exemptions on some of the tariffs we've been putting in. That's a challenge, because there's one person that makes that decision, and that is the President of the United States. It's nobody else. With regards to the U.S.-Canadian relationship, if I could, I've been neighbors with my friend Mike for 30 years in Northern Virginia. And about 10 years ago, it was autumn time, and I went and I blew the leaves out of his yard. I thought I was helping, and it really ticked him off. And he was mad at me for about a year, and I thought I was helping. And I can't help but think the president, back in November through January, when you all were going through what you're doing up north of us, I thought he may have thought that he was helping by the 51st state crap and stuff like that. And it took about, you know, just like it took Mike 2 years to not be mad at me anymore, it might be 2 years before you guys aren't mad at us anymore, but hopefully that will go away. But the fact of the matter is we are linked at the hip through infrastructure, through the delivery mechanism, transportation, and the supply. It really should be Fortress North America. And I think a lot of my members understand that. About half of my members actually have operations in Canada. They also, I think we are linked at the hip when it comes to the tariff situation. Going back to AI, the best example of the law of unintended consequences is actually AI. I don't know if you saw a couple of weeks ago that they announced the contract for the Stargate 2, the huge AI data processing center in Texas. The behind-the-meter supplier of that project is huge, and the power supply contract itself is $20 billion. Is actually being supplied by a company called Voltagrid. Voltagrid is a spin-off of Halliburton. They were built up because Halliburton electrified their fracking fleet. That's what got Voltagrid established, and they began to grow their market share. And the AI data centers realized that this was an excellent behind-the-meter solution. The problem with Voltagrid is their generators are Austrian-based, Janbacher. They're actually shipped to Canada and then ultimately assembled in the completed in the United States. And so they're subject to tariffs. And the tariff bill on those generators, when you're trying to beat China in the AI race, and it's not just economic, it is a national security issue. For the United States, we've got to win this for national security. The inadvertent and unintended consequences is they took the most reliable source of power and just tripled the cost of it. So those are the type of things the administration has to grapple with. It'll be interesting to watch how this plays out. Sorry.
No, fantastic stuff. And, I'll just say, our feelings are hurt, I think, in Canada.
We'll stay out of your lawn. We'll stay out of your argument.
It's been emotional, but it has also exposed some fundamental aspects of relationship that seem now impervious to politics, and that is energy infrastructure. That through all this, actually, energy hasn't been tariffed because it almost can't be tariffed. It is too important. And actually, I find that the U.S. oil and gas industry has been very supportive. We're all self-interested. No one's doing this because they're altruistic. But that is a component of the North American relationship that is so important and so mutually beneficial that it has been able to escape these tariffs. And I would recommend, softwood lumber and steel and aluminum would probably help you to get these, for cheaper. But at least on energy and uranium, they didn't end up actually facing tariffs. And I will say, is usually bad news on the American-Canadian front. But in the last month, some very positive things that you're not obsessed with it like me, you might have missed. One was Congresswoman Julie Fedorchuk brought a legislation in the House that passed bipartisan support on promoting cross-border infrastructure act. And specifically mentioning, it was, cross-border, it's mostly Canada-America, specifically mentioned Keystone XL. God bless, North Dakota, our cousins in North Dakota. It would probably go through there. I'm sure that's why she supported it. But this is almost what we would have asked for in Canada. We absolutely want to export more to the United States. We are, in some ways, we can consider ourselves energy dominant. We have tremendous resources, but we need buyers. And the best market in the world by far is the United States. And the biggest growing natural gas market in the world is not in Asia, it's the United States because data centers, because you use so much in power generation. So we would absolutely love to send more oil and natural gas to the United States, even if we also want to send more oil and natural gas into the Pacific. That was one thing, that bill, which was meant to streamline permitting for cross-border infrastructure. The other thing was that the Trump Department of Justice filed a brief in mid-September, the same week, on Enbridge Line 5, which if you're in Canada, you probably watch this kind of thing. But that is a pipeline, Enbridge pipeline, that carries Canadian crude, goes under Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, pops back up, feeds most of Ontario. And Governor Whitmer from Michigan has been trying to stop it since 2020. And that is a real threat to our energy security. It's our oil sending, it's if you go on top of the Great Lakes, it's rock, and if you go under the Great Lakes, it's softer ground. So we'd like to build pipeline softer ground. Department of Justice finally filed a brief saying that they were intervening because Michigan's efforts were undermining their foreign policy and undermining the 1977 pipeline treaty that we did basically to provide the security and reliability for building pipeline across the border. And finally, Ambassador Hoekstra, he's been a bit of a controversial ambassador in Canada. But last week was in Fort McMurray, which is where the oil sands are centered. This is our Midland for all of you oil and gas guys there. And did a podcast with the Alberta Premier. Obviously, Alberta is the major oil producer, very culturally similar, I would say, to America. And they called it North America Energy Dominance, by the way, Brigham. They called the podcast North America Energy Dominance. I don't know if we got it from them or if they got it from us. But very positive to see the ambassador focusing on energy production and energy trade between our countries. So despite everything, I would say if you're in, you want to export from Canada, this has at least exposed that we need you, you need us, and there's not a lot that can get in between them.
Can I just add something real quickly? You raise a very interesting point. So Julie Fedorchik, Congressman Fedorchik, was a state regulator in North Dakota. She probably has forgotten more about energy policy and infrastructure than most people know. And it's refreshing to go to Congress and see a congressman that understands it. And border state, right? North Dakota. Governor Burgum, now Secretary Burgum, same thing. So there are people who get it in both countries. And I think, they're starting to have their voices heard. And it'll make a huge difference. And the government is also moving forward, and frankly, it's about time. A lot of this also falls under interstate commerce, dormant commerce clause, other constitutional provisions. Basically, you can't stop the truck at the border and say that commodity can't come through here, right? We would never get anything done. So in my view, pipelines fall under that same piece. And even though there's a difference between FERC and other permitting authorities, you can't regulate it from a safety standpoint, and you can't regulate it in a way that states like Michigan and New York have been attempting to do. And I don't think that's going to be tolerated much longer.
Yeah, I would say, Congressman Fedorchik's been pretty solid on this issue. I had the great fortune of having dinner with her a few weeks ago, and I could barely follow what she was talking about. She's just so detail-oriented about, just the engineering of the pipeline. She can understand it. So we're very lucky to have someone like that in Congress to serve the energy file. I actually want to just briefly chat a quick minute about uranium and nuclear, because it did come up on the previous panel that we're kind of in the mode of a nuclear revolution, and we are restarting a lot of stuff. And here in the United States, 3 Mile Island's getting restarted, a number of other nuclear projects are getting started. But Heather, you're originally from Saskatchewan, the home of Canada's uranium, and it's not just uranium, it's like the champagne of uranium. It's spectacular stuff. Do you want to just kind of talk about some of the stuff that Canada's doing on nuclear as well as uranium?
Yeah, I would love to, because I love to talk about uranium, because we all talk about critical minerals and rare earths, and they're usually not rare. I think we all know that. It's the quality of the deposit, and I'm assuming there's a few geologists in the room, and it's the quality of the deposit determines whether it's economic or not. So it's not, it's just not having samarium beside your coal deposit. It is about the quantity of it and how economic and how easy to extract. The Athabasca Basin, northern Saskatchewan, is absolutely the richest, the world's richest deposit of uranium. And we have grades about 100 times what would be normal deposit, for example, in Australia, which has the world's largest reserves. But obviously, it's just nice to just take chunks. Sometimes they drill cores, which are over 50% uranium. So it's basically just pure, stick it in a reactor, practically, not quite. Anyways, if you aren't following, and Twitter uranium bros is quite a thing. I recommend it just for the entertainment. But the uranium industry has been, obviously they had, Fukushima just devastated it. We shut in production in Canada. Cameco shut in production. And only in the last 3 years with the Ukraine invasion where you start to think about energy security. And now with AI, that nuclear is a hot topic, and we're all committing to tripling, for example, nuclear energy. There isn't enough uranium being produced right now, and there isn't a line of sight on enough uranium being produced right now to satisfy those demands. If we build all the reactors we say we're going to build, there isn't enough uranium. And the United States has focused on this. I think they just announced DPA funding will be eligible for uranium. They've announced some other critical minerals funding, but which, you know, might be some nice redundancy, but if Saskatchewan can't produce more uranium, the global supply will simply be in deficit. And the other alternative supplier is Kazakhstan, and they're very much controlled by China and Russia. There's been a lot of politicking there to monopolize their supply, and very much a bifurcation in the global uranium market. So we're, you know, we're trying to produce more uranium, and it'd be great to have market certainty, I guess, to get to my point of where that uranium can go. But right now, I mean, buy uranium stocks, they're probably likely to go up still, but it is a very serious energy security issue, and Saskatchewan is the solution to that issue.
Thank you. Yeah, Saskatchewan's a solution to a lot of issues, I think.
If I could, in the United States, I agree with you 100%. I'm from Utah, big uranium state way back when uranium was cool back in the 50s. In the United States, nuclear, from our perspective, the more molecules, the better. The best part of all of this is natural gas will be that bridge fuel that will take us from here to there. That's our message continuously.
Yeah, I would say it does take forever to get a nuclear power plant built, much less restarted, much less refurbished in the age of AI. So certainly, until that time, it's probably good to get.
We've got your back.
Yeah, and I do believe, if I'm not mistaken, there's about 100 gigawatts of natural gas-fired power plant generated electricity coming online in the next 5 years in the United States alone, just to fuel some of the AI data centers. And so there's a lot of discussion about that and how we're going to immediately get to where we need to get in terms of the exponential need for energy. I think an electron will never have been more valuable than it will be coming up here in the next 5 years. One final kind of point before we turn it over to the audience. I know that, you know, Canada and the United States, we have had these issues. We are working together. Do you think that it's important for us to tie some of our energy together, perhaps in a new moment, use this as a way to bridge our two countries together, or perhaps to even just reiterate that we have that relationship with energy? I think, for example, earlier on in the tariff dispute, we had Premier Doug Ford, who threatened to turn off the electricity to the United States around the Super Bowl, and that definitely was not well received by some people down here. And so energy has been, a lot of people have talked about energy as a bargaining chip and as a point of leverage, and a way that Canada can actually extract what it wants from the United States. But a lot of other people seem to think this is really not the way to go. It could backfire worse than we think it will. And maybe we could just kind of talk about that really quickly, just the power of Canada's energy down here in the US, and whether or not this should be used as a leverage or bargaining chip in ongoing discussions. Brigham's smiling. He doesn't want to answer the question.
Yeah, okay, real quickly. You know, here's the deal. Canada's economy is tied to the U.S. Whether you want it to be, don't want it to be, it's just the way it is. And Canada's economy is smaller than the United States economy. So to some extent, you've heard the old story when, what is it, the U.S. coughs, everyone else in the world catches a cold. Well, I think it's extremely true in Canada, but it shouldn't be about threats. It should be about allies sticking together, not just U.S. and Canada, but globally our allies as well. I get that tariffs are a bargaining tool. They make sense sometimes in short-term deals, but you know, and nobody has asked me, but you know, Brigham's view is we have enough to fight about with other people. We shouldn't be fighting amongst ourselves, and we should figure out a way to not only work together, but to share in the technology and the benefits and the innovation that we're seeing across all of the different type of energy sources.
That's a great answer.
If I am a light manufacturer, if I am a small business, if I'm a major integrated company, and I want to successfully manage my risk. I want to be tied to my Canadian partners more than anybody else. I don't know why you'd want to set aside a Canadian relationship on behalf of a Japanese or a Chinese or an EU. It makes absolute business sense for us to kind of get over our little kerfluffle that we've gone through right now and reestablish these ties. And I do think, again, nobody's asked me, this is the gospel according to Tim, for whatever. But I do think that we have to view things as a snapshot in time. And it is a long 3 years and 2 months left ahead of us in this Trump administration.
It's only been 10 months.
Yeah, imagine that. But the fact of the matter is, things will. I am betting the farm that things are going to look very different a year from now.
Yeah.
There's some. The administration's made it clear that there's going to be some pain felt by friends and foes both, in order to sort of reorder the global order. And I've said this over and over again, that if you treat this administration as a Republican administration, and you tried out the Republican playbook, you're going to lose every single time. This is a disruptor administration. It is populated by disruptors. It's not populated by Republicans. So don't bring the same old crappy playbook that has been in place for the last 25 or 30 years. Be innovative, be transactional, and you'll be able to figure them out eventually.
Well, transactional is a great word. I will say when the tariff talk and the 51st state and calling the prime minister governor first started, there was obviously an inclination or knee-jerk reaction of wanting to say, what cards do we have to play? What are our cards? And obviously the ace up the sleeve is 4 million barrels of crude oil going down to the United States every single day. And there might have been a tendency to want to somehow leverage that. And I think if you were Russia or Iran or Venezuela, there's ways you could leverage 4 million barrels a day of exports. But honestly, it's just not in our nature. That discussion couldn't even move beyond the pub, because we think you're our best friends. I don't know if you guys think that. We think you're our best friends. And even in maybe the lowest moments, that was never a realistic option. We were never going to expose you to energy insecurity, even if we could have out of spite for a couple of days or a couple of weeks. And so I guess that speaks to, again, exposing, and stripping bare everything out, the interest or the values and all those things. The transaction is still so mutually beneficial for the two of us. And then thinking through, if we are smart, it is Fortress North America. There's no other continent that has this level of energy security. We'd be crazy to jeopardize it. It is crazy to jeopardize it. Therefore, we actually haven't jeopardized it because it's too crazy to do. So I think we could take some solace in the fact that, yes, this is an almost untouchable relationship. The energy trade between these two countries, it benefits both of us greatly.
Fantastic. Thank you. I would like to very much open it up to questions from the audience, if we have any. I think we have a gentleman right back there.
Hi, thank you. My name is Nick Lombardo. I'm with ClearPath. This has been a great conversation. Really appreciate it. We talked a lot about trade and tariffs, and I'm curious if the panel has thoughts on the review of USMCA, which underpins our trade relationship. The process has already kicked off on this side of the border, and I'd be interested to know your thoughts on the challenges and opportunities for the energy sector through that review.
Jamie, you should probably answer this question.
Yeah, so there are a lot of challenges and opportunities with the USMCA, but there are also a lot of other external treaties and pipelines and other things that govern the energy sector between the two countries. So some of it it's less relevant to energy than it would be to some of the other industries that we exchange. However, it is important to think about the North American energy marketplace as a manufacturing marketplace, and it requires inputs. Inputs like heavy steel. Heavy steel is very much needed for offshore drilling rigs. You cannot build offshore drilling rigs without that heavy steel, and heavy steel is right now at a 50% premium to be imported. You can't get heavy steel that you need for that kind of drilling rig right now in the US, or if you can, it's on back order. So there's a lot of manufacturing inputs that the energy sector needs, things like transmission lines that are being tariffed under Section 232, And those kinds of decisions are going to have to be things that Canada specifically, but perhaps even Mexico and the United States start looking at whether or not these Section 232 exemptions, such as aluminum, steel, copper, that are all playing a huge role in the energy industry and the transmission grid, are going to be looped away from the Section 232 tariffs and instead put into a new USMCA. I think that would be in the best interest of electrifying the United States and in keeping the relationship strong between the two, but also in creating a fortress North America, creating an energy grid between the two countries that is strong, stable, secure, and prosperous, which is what Canada and the United States very much need in order to meet the AI demand of tomorrow. So long story short, there's tariffs that are outside the USMCA framework that will need to be looped into the USMCA framework. And I think that some of the energy sector would behoove them to perhaps have comments about that and as well about the inputs. Anyone else?
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think, the longer the tariffs go on, the more headwinds many industries, not just the energy industry, are going to face. And, you're going to see more and more companies going to the White House saying, all right, enough's enough. We need to turn this down.
It's anecdotal from my perspective. Third quarter, a lot of the costs were eaten. Fourth quarter, now they're being passed along. First quarter next year, you're going to see it. And I do think in the conversations we've had, the White House, USTR, and others are starting to wonder exactly what's going to happen there.
Any other questions? Yes.
Scott Seaman with Mitsui. I know this is, well, we started to talk about Mexico, so I just wanted to hear more thoughts about how you see Mexico fitting into U.S.-Canada energy relations.
I can start because I've thought about this, and Edward here from TC Energy thinks about it every day. From a Canadian perspective, because I was tasked with writing a paper last year on this North American energy relationship and trying to find pieces of the Mexican puzzle to stick into it, and it was very hard for me. All of our trade is bilateral, so Mexico is not really a customer for Canada. Mexico is a net importer of American natural gas. Mexico's oil production has been in long-term decline. Pemex has obviously been poorly managed. That's an opportunity, frankly, for Canada because they're a heavy oil supplier to American refineries, and we are also a heavy oil supplier to American refineries. So when we are speaking of North American energy dominance, for us, no disrespect to our American or to our Mexican brethren, we have other very positive things to trade, but it seems to be very much a Canada-U.S. relationship.
Any other questions? Yes. Oh, just please wait for the microphone so that the online audience can hear your question. Thank you.
Some serious observers of AI say that it's in a gigantic bubble that will burst because of lack of productive outcomes. Are energy companies prepared for that contingency?
That's a good question. It's interesting. On the AI piece, what we've watched is, again, you're right, there's a huge rush. It's a $1 trillion rush to something. We'll just be there. We're watching the AI from how it impacts our actual operations. When you come to permitting, for example, we've had companies who have gone ahead and created their own AI to expedite the permit process. We have companies now floating out reduction times of 90% on an APD on federal lands and an 80% reduction on an LNG FERC application. AI is going to impact the industry. It's going to put a lot of bureaucrats out of business, frankly, more than anything. The question is are we prepared to absorb the shock when all of a sudden the market, the AI power generation market dries up? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. But again, don't bet against this industry. Don't ever bet against the industry. So.
I think from my perspective in research, to your point, AI does a lot of things well, very well, especially on process flow, on reducing, analyzing large amounts of data in a very short term. Gosh, I think you could do a NEPA study probably in a day or two with it if you have all the inputs. Very important. Whether or not it will become smart enough to, in the short term, to take over what everyone thinks AI means, but necessarily doesn't, remains to be seen. But for AI, the two Achilles heel for these highly valued companies are, again, will you find new processors that require much less energy? And or can you pay the bill for the energy that's required? Because, Mrs. Jones in Iowa doesn't want her electric bill doubled to pay for infrastructure for somebody else to use more electricity. And it's going to be a huge cost driver for AI that I don't think we may fully realize or have taken that cost structure into account yet.
That's why it's so crucial that we get these processing centers behind the meter. It really is. I mean, United States, 7% increase in electricity costs right now, and you're exactly right. Our parents or grandparents shouldn't be footing the bill for Oracle or anybody else. Yeah, again, to the AI question is like, right now we think AI is going to be doing one thing, but the lesson learned from technology is it doesn't matter if Twitter started on 140 characters showing what I ate for lunch today, what it is now. I think AI processing is going to be the exact same way. 10 years from now, it'll be an entirely different application.
And for the audience that may be listening, explain behind the meter for folks.
Yeah, it's the terminology, which is, do you do on-site generation or do you try to tie into the local grid? And Utah's a good example. Right now, Rocky Mountain Power, Pacific Core will come to you and say, no matter what it is you're doing, we cannot deliver the power to you for the next 5 years. And so the question is, well, I don't want to wait 5 years. I want to get this going now. So they put their on-site natural gas generators there.
I would also add to that New Hampshire has also voted to deregulate a lot of its energy industry in order to allow behind the meter for prospective AI data centers. I think we're just at time now, so I want to thank our panel and I want to thank all the audience for coming and joining us today. Again, we really appreciate it, and again, think about North American energy dominance. It's good times. We're going to get a lot of electricity. We're going to power those data centers. Thank you so much for coming.